a good kvittel, a gemar chasima toiva. I am recording Sunday night, the day before Erev Sukkos, and I want to begin with the question of the Torah Shulchan Aruch. The Torah he lived around 750, 780 years ago, and he was the illustrious son of the Rosh, and he wrote the Torah Shulchan Aruch, which all tzaddikim said, if you learn Torah Shulchan Aruch, you are mitaher and mezachech your neshama. So he asks the question, why is it that Sukkos is after Yom Kippur? Because the reasons that we have for celebrating Sukkos with the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds and all this all happened right after Pesach. So why would we wait till after the summer and then after Rosh Hashanah and then have Sukkos? That is his question. And he answers a simple answer that, well, if we made it right after Pesach, Sukkos, then the world would say the reason we have the Yom Tov then is because we want the nice weather. That after Pesach, it's the tail end or the middle of spring, and summer is yet to come, and it's a lot more comfortable in the shade and in the outdoors for that period of time, and that's why we're sitting in the sukkah. But the Mekubalim say a deeper, and I find a very interesting answer, and that is because on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, a person doesn't know what he was judged for and what the conditions would be for the entire year. And one of the considerations is that the person has to go into Golus. Now, we think of Golus going from town to town, and through a forest and sleeping in the Beis Medrash, and that's Golus. But the truth is that if somebody is working and he has stable parnasa, and he loses suddenly lo aleinu lo aleichem his job, he is thrust into Golus also. He doesn't know what tomorrow's going to bring. He doesn't know at the end of the month how he will pay his bills. And that's a form of Golus just the same. Misery. So the Mekubalim said that Sukkos was put after Yom Kippur so that if a person, chas v'sholom, had to experience and be thrust into the realm of Golus, that he could be yoitze with Sukkos. That the fact we leave our house and we leave the comfort of the house, and we don't know if it's going to be freezing on Sukkos or it's going to be very hot. There were some Sukkos, if you remember, that was so hot that it was hard to sit in the sukkah. Right now, Baruch Hashem, outside, we have beautiful, beautiful, cool weather, but we're not guaranteed it. So if a person goes out of his house and he goes into the realm of outdoors and the inconvenience of it, he's yoitze Golus. So the Mekubalim said that when we go into our sukkah, so if someone had a decree of Golus for the whole year, we're yoitze with the actual sukkah and the inyan of Golus, just like we give out before Yom Kippur lekach, and that is because if someone has a gezerah of anias, chas v'sholom 1,000 times, and he's going to have to come onto the tzibur to be able to survive with parnasa, we give him before Yom Kippur lekach, and we say to him, he says, please give me the lekach, and we give it to him with the kavanah that if he has to be under the umbrella of anias that upcoming year, he's yoitza with the lekach. And that's why we give it, and that is the kavanah of it, and that's why we don't miss it, Erev Yom Kippur, because that's the propitious time for that. Now, we know that the first night, tomorrow night, the first night of Sukkos, is the yortzeit of Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu was nifter the first day of Sukkos, and the pasuk in Vayechi talks about 70 days of them moaning and mourning and all of that. And 70 days is really nowhere in Chazal. We have 30 days, we have 7 days for Shiva, we have a year, Shana, but we don't have 70 days. But if you count from the day that Yaakov Avinu was nifter, the first day of Sukkos, and you go 70 days, you count 70 days, you come out to the first day of Hanukkah. And we know that Yaakov Avinu is myriad. It's a darkness. It's the inyan of Golus. And he corresponds, the Torah also says that Avram Avinu is the etzem of Pesach. And we know the Lushi Va'asiyu Gos was matzah, it was Pesach time. There's a kesher to Pesach. And Yitzchak Avinu was Shavuos. The Akedah and the shofar of the Akedah was the kol shofar by Matan Torah. But Yaakov Avinu is the etzem of Sukkos, because Sukkos is the send-off, the last of the 3 regalim of the diaraisas. And Purim took place a few hundred years before Sukkos. Before Hanukkah. And from Sukkos into Hanukkah led the way of Klal Yisrael to go Nebuch for the next 2,000 years as we are in Golus. So Yaakov Avinu was very, very concerned after he could not reveal Mashiach. You see, when it says in the pasuk, Yaakov Avinu bikesh legalos es haketz, commonly we teach the children that he wanted to tell them, to tell his children, when is the Ketz Hayomim going to be? And v'nistamah mimenu, and from heaven they hid it. They took away his Ruach HaKodesh. He couldn't see it. So he knew that Klal Yisrael is in trouble, that they're going out to Golus. But we teach the children also that he wanted legalos es haketz, not just to tell them when it would be, but to actually bring about the Golus, legalos es haketz. And they refused to do it for him, min hashamayim. So he wanted to have a kesher to Hanukkah, knowing it was the last Yom Tiv, that Klal Yisrael, like a national Yom Tiv, that we would say the whole Hallel every day of Hanukkah, and that there would be a kesher of Klal Yisrael into the Golus, the dark Golus, on Hanukkah. So Yaakov Avinu, who was the backbone of myriad, and he slept before he got to Lavan, and prepared the way with his machshava for what was coming up. And one of those things was to attach himself from the day of his Petira to Hanukkah, which was 70 days later. And on the first day of Hanukkah, that gave him a kesher to influence the golus the geula that would come right after the celebration of Hanukkah. Now, it's 2,000 years later, but he hoped for it to be much, much sooner. That when we sing on Hanukkah, Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, it wasn't just a game, that tzaddikim mamish were holding by the kanfei nisharim, and that it should happen that day. So it was very realistic in their minds. It wasn't something, yeah, we sing every year Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. It didn't happen for the last 50 years, so who knows if it's going to happen this year. But that's not how tzaddikim thought. They thought that the vehicle of traveling to Eretz Yisrael, excuse me, with the kanfei nisharim, was a reality. And it was going to happen. So that's why Yaakov Avinu's yortzeit is the first day of Sukkos. And the pasuk says, why is he attached to the Yom Tov of Sukkos? Because it says, V'Yaakov nosa Sukkosa. Now, the first reason by Avram Avinu is a solid reason, and so is by Yitzchak, the shofar of Mashiach and the shofar of his Akedah. But to say that the whole Yom Tov is entrenched in the essence of Yaakov Avinu, because the pasuk says that after he had the confrontation with Esav, that he left and said goodbye to Esav, and then he went to Sukkos and remained in the city for 18 months, says the Targum Yonason ben Uziel. And it says, Vayiven lo bayis. And the Meforshim asked, that's what Yaakov Avinu was worried about, was a house? But the Targum Yonason ben Uziel said it doesn't mean house, it means the Beis HaMedrash, which is the Beis Hashem. That when he moved to Sukkot, the first day he began building and arranging that there be a Beis HaMedrash for his entire family to be able to use each and every day that they would remain in Sukkot. And he built a house, and he made Ula Mikneu Osa Sukkos, which really the Meforshim teach that for Hashem and avodas Hashem, we build a beautiful, firm, and sturdy house. But for the Gashmias, Lemikneu, also Sukkos, he made protection for them, that they were protected from the bad weather and everything, the cold, but he didn't make an ikar. In other words, he made it something that they were able to learn that for avodas Hashem, that's where you exert all of your influence and money. And then when there's Gashmias, that we have to provide for ourselves and our families, but that is secondary, it's not first. So says the Targum Yonason ben Uziel. Now, tonight is the fourth day of the holy 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Now, the 4 days, say all the Sfarim, it corresponds each day to Yud K Vav K. Motzoi Yom Kippur corresponds to the Kutzel Shel Yud, the thorn on the top of the Yud, which is connected the world of Keser, which is even higher than the Yud, which is Shemona Esrei, that were in the Olam of Atzilus. But the Motzoi Yom Kippur, and that's why Shlomo HaMelech said that take the opportunity and make a very big Seudah and celebrate, because that's going to be the thriving vehicle that's going to carry you through the year. And you're starting off, and that's why Shlomo HaMelech, I mean, many people on Motzoi, a Yom Tiv, they will take a tea, Motzoi, a fast day, they'll take a tea, they'll take a piece of cake, but they're shvach, they're weak from the fasting. But Motzoi, Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to do that. Shlomo HaMelech described there was candles on everyone singing, people, Baruch Hashem. Motzoi Yom Kippur, wash and have a regular Suda with Divrei Torah, with singing, that they're ushering in the V'samachta b'chagecha, v'hoyisa ach sameach. And it's with that we go into actual Sukkos. Now, the fourth and final day, the Koznitzer Magid, the Koznitzer Magid was a Talmud of the Mizritcha Magid, and later of the Noam Elimelech. And the Noam Elimelech left over to his 4 illustrious Talmidim. He had many, many more illustrious Talmidim, but he left over the koyach of his sight to the Choyze, who was able then to see from one end of the world what any Yid was doing anywhere in the face of the earth, to Reb Mendel Rimmon of his Koyach HaMoyach, and to the Apterov, the Koyach HaRuach, and the Koyach HaLev to the Koznitzer Magid. And it is told that the Koznitzer, and these were all tzaddikim gemurim above and beyond, and the Lo Aleinu Lo Aleichem, the Koznitzer Magid, was sick the last 7.5 years of his life, and he was in a bed, but they carried the bed in on Shabbos so he could daven with the tzibur, and he was lying in the bed, in the Beis HaMidrash. But when it came to the Kedusha of Keser, he came out of the bed by himself and stood in the thin air with no one holding him and no support, said Keser, and then went back into the bed and was lying in the bed after he stood independently in the middle of the air during Keser. So the Koznitzer Magid, who we just said this about, said that the last day of the 4 days, which comes out Erev Sukkos, is the biggest day of the year for tzedakah, minus Purim. Because Purim is the whole day is the Olam HaKeser, and that's like a higher point than the whole year. And that's why it says that every Yom Tov will change its format and be different than everything after Mashiach comes, but not Purim. Because Purim is above and beyond, and before Mashiach and after Mashiach, it doesn't make really any difference. It's untouchable, it's so high. The before and the after doesn't make a difference. Now, we then come in to Sukkos. Now, the Gemara says, Beferish, that Sukkos is the Rishon Hu L'Cheshbon Avonos, that the beginning of the accounting of doing Averis for Yidden begins on Sukkos. So all the Meforshim ask, what do you mean? There's 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkos. No Yid is doing any Aveira those 4 days? And they answer and say there are Yidden that do Aveiras. But what the Gemara means, the Pshat in the Gemara, is that the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkos are so high that with the slightest effort, a person can sail through those 4 days untouched, that even if the Yetzer Hara is running after him, and the Samach Mem wants him to trip and to do this and do that, with the slightest effort, he can prevent it. Because he's enveloped in an atmosphere that is so high that he could be untouchable, but he needs a drop of effort. Because we know that a person has bechira, and if he wants to do an Aveira, he's allowed to do it from heaven. He's given the koyach, or the ability. He may not be allowed to do it because it's an Aveira, but the koyach to do it, and the possibility to do it, and the wherewithal to do it, he could do it. But if he exerts even the slightest little koyach, he can prevent an entire 4 days completely pure and tahor. So say the Svarim. But as big as Sukkos is, it's still not the 4 days before, and the Gemara says it's Rishon Cheshbon Avonos, that's when the people start doing the Aveiros, and we make the Cheshbon of Avonos. Now, the Chassidish Svarim Taich, see, the Gemara says if someone does tshuva, Meira, he's afraid he's going to have a bad year, he's afraid he'll be punished, he'll be sick, he'll be poor, and that's why he's doing tshuva. So his Aveiros all become shkagos. That means if he's doing tshuva, not a game, and not, okay, I'll cry now, and in 2 days I'll be back to my old ways and do the old stuff. But he's sincere. But it's out of fear. It's not out of love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not. So if that's the case, all of his Aveiros become shkagos. But he comes in, that's Yom Kippur. And Rosh Hashanah, we throw away the Aveiros into Tashluch. But Yom Kippur, they become shkagos. But what happens if he does tshuva me'ahava? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm not worried about if you're going to punish me. I owe you a debt for giving me a year of life. And I want to do tshuva which will bring me closer to you. And a more meaningful v'dabek libeinu b'mitzvos secha. Because when a yid does an Aveira, there's a separation, there's a curtain, there's a wall put up between him and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we ask, v'dabek libeinu b'mitzvos secha, that when we do the mitzvahs, it should be with such love and such desire and such tshuka that we will reattach ourselves to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and get closer. That's the pshat, v'dabek libeinu b'mitzvos secha. So, when someone does that and he comes into Sukkos, it says, Nasalo Kezochios. All those Aveiros, and I said to you, either last year or the year before, that when someone does Tshuva Me'ava and all his Aveiros turn into Zochios, to mitzvahs, we go back after Sukkos to the water and we draw out the water to bake our matzahs. So said Reb Baruch Mimezhebush, the grandson of the Baal Shem. And I mean, those were the Aveiros we threw into the water. But now that we do tshuva me'ava, those averos we threw in and we want nothing to do with them, we do want to have something to do with them. And we go back and we fetch those averos out of the water and we bake our matzahs because we are proud of them. So when the Gemara says that it's Rishon hu lecheshbon avonos, so many tzaddikim teach it that now that they're zochios, we're not running away from them, we're counting each one of them. We're making a cheshbon because now they are tshuva me'ava and tshuva me'simcha, and we are making them into mitzvahs. And that's why we're making the cheshbon la'avonos. Now, the Vilna Gaon used to say that right before he was nifter, that the hardest mitzvah that he had in his 70 years that he lived, he was born in 1727, excuse me, and he was nifter in 1797, exactly 70 years. So the Vilna Gaon said that the hardest mitzvah he had in his lifetime was Simcha on Sukkos. Because the pasuk says 3 times, Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem shivas yomim, that we have to be besimcha. And simcha means 7 days of Sukkos, 24 hours a day. It's not for 5 minutes we're going to sing a niggin and be besimcha and then go back to our melancholy and go back to our disappointments and dwelling on our shortcomings. It's talking about 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And there's a second pasuk, V'samachta b'chagecha, referring to Sukkos. And then for the last, it's because since it says Sukkos, and Sukkos is only 7 days through Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, it's like the Shulchan Aruch says, Regel Bifnei Atzma. It's a separate Yom Tiv. And that's why there's a whole vikuach about eating Shmini Atzeres in the Sukkah. Because if it's really part of Sukkot, it's Sveika Diyoma, we should make a bracha when we eat in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, but we don't. The Gemara says, Mesav Yasvina, we sit in the Sukkah. That means all the Sudos on Shmini Atzeres. Uvruche lo barchinim, we do not make a bracha leishev b'Sukkah. So the actual Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah is like a regel bifnei atzma. And there's many reasons why we eat in the Sukkah, even though it's not a Sveika Diyoma. But looking and analyzing Sukkot itself, it's each and every day a requirement of dynamic, lively simcha. Now, we have Hoshana Rabbah, which is the last day that Moshe Rabbeinu worked out from heaven, that Rosh Hashanah is the ksiva, the writing. Yom Kippur is the sealing of all the envelopes and the decree, what you're decreed for that year. But Moshe Rabbeinu worked out that they were not sent off on Yom Kippur, after Yom Kippur. It remained till Hoshana Rabbah on the desk. And as long as a letter remains on a desk, you could always open it and change it. So even if somebody had a decree of Chas v'Shalom lo aleinu 1,000 times, a very difficult year, the piskin, the envelopes are still on the table. So if you have enough simcha on Sukkos, it can be changed. And then it's sent off on Hoshana Rabbah as we take the 5 Aravos and bang 5 times. The Arizal says it's at that moment that the Yid has all the piskin. That's why we wish people piska tova, a good kvittel, because the kvittel is still pending. It's sitting on the desk by the Rabbanu Shalom. It wasn't sent out yet. And that was how Moshe Rabbeinu hoisef yom echad midaito. Because al pi pshat, it means the 3 days before Matan Torah. That Hashem said, V'kidashtem hayom u'mocher, you have 2 days of preparation. Moshe Rabbeinu on his own added a 3rd day. Hosef yom echad midaito, on his own. But al pi Kabbalah, it's referring to Hoshana Rabbah. That on top of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we still have a chance until Hoshana Rabbah. And when we take those 5 and bang it, and he's medactic very strongly, not to hit on the ground more than 5 times or less than 5 times, that's when the chasima comes for Klal Yisrael. There's only 1% of Klal Yisrael that still doesn't have the chasima, and it comes on Zos Chanukah, Bezos Yechupar Avon Yaakov, and that's when that last 1% that had hanging in the air the final decision, because in heaven they were weighing this way and that way, they couldn't make that decision. So it comes Zos Chanukah, the last day of Chanukah, and we will talk Be'ezus Hashem much more about Chanukah. But I want to say to you that, and that's why we see that we, like, for instance, we eat kreplach on Purim, which is a hidden day. That's why the children are all masqueraded in costumes, because it's a hidden masqueraded day. Erev Yom Kippur, which is also a hidden day that even the Satan has no reshus to badmouth Klal Yisrael on Yom Kippur. And then Hoshana Rabbah, which is, and that's why the Chazan wears a kittel and sings the niggin for Kaddish, just like on Yom Kippur, that's the kesher to Yom Kippur from Hoshana Rabbah. Now, there's no separate Gashmias mitzvah Shmini Atzeres, and the Zohar Kodesh says on Shmini Atzeres, it's called the day of Yehuda Shalem. It's bigger than Yom Kippur. And that's why it has nothing to do with the Gashmias in this world. There's no lulav, no matzah, there's nothing. That each Yom Tov has its distinct mitzvah. For Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, it's only the simcha of the day, and that's what we dance with the Sefer Torah and everything. But there's nothing that we have as a special designated mitzvah to carry the day for us. And indeed, that's why many tzaddikim who were dying to move to Eretz Yisrael, but they didn't, because they wouldn't have the extra day of Shmini of Simchas Torah. In Eretz Yisrael, they have Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah on the same day. But there is a major difference between the two al pi Kabbalah, and you see in the flavor of the day. On Simchas Torah, we could lean over and over and over. You can't do that on Shmini Atzeres. And there's distinctiveness to each and every aspect of the 2 days. If you want to give a liyazat on Shmini Atzeres, you're not allowed to lean over. On Simchas Torah, you can lean over 50 times the parsha. It's so high in its realm that it has nothing to do with Olam Hazeh. Now the Satmar Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Levracha, Rabbi Yoel, when you would see him, and I saw him, of course, had the schus to see him walking on the street, he needed 2 Gabboim on each side of him. because his legs were so swollen he could barely walk. He needed help with every step. Yet when it came to Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, he danced because the people didn't dance. They only sang and clapped and stood in their place. And he, the Rebbe, danced and ran around the perimeter of the Beis HaMedrash, and they once figured out what was the distance of his dancing, and it came out 13 miles. For all the times they measured the parameter of the Beis HaMedrash, and then like how much did he dance? And they asked him, Rebbe, during the year, the Rebbe could hardly walk a block. He needs help on all sides. And here on Simchas Torah and Shmini Atzeres, he's like a malach flying, and no one holding him, no one helping him, nothing. So he answered, as he was always so quick and so funny and so bright, he said, Shmini regel bifnei atzma, because the word regel means holiday, Yom Tov, but it also means feet. So he played the Shulchan Aruch says that Shmini Atzeres, and we make Shachiyanu on Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah when the women bench licht or we make Kiddush. It's not like the last 2 days of Pesach that we do not make Shachiyanu. And it's indeed its own distinct 2 days. So that's what he answered. He said, Regel, which in Shulchan Aruch means the Yom Tiv, but he meant his legs. Regel bifnei atzma. When we come into the realm of Shemini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, we don't need any help, and we don't need anything to be able to participate and immerse in the simcha of the day. Now, speaking of mikveh, the word sukkah is begematria 91. Samach is 60, Vav is 6, Chof is 20, and the Hey is 5. 91. Now, if you take Yud K, Vav K, and Adna, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, one is begematria 26, and the other is begematria 65. And you have 91. And it's the only mitzvah that we go in with our entire body. There's no other mitzvah. The Baal Shem Tov said that mikveh for a man is not a mitzvah, but there's nothing that could rise him or raise him to more kedusha and tara than going to a mikveh. But it's not a mitzvah for him. But going into a sukkah is a mitzvah. And the more we stay there, the more we absorb and are drenched with the shechina from the schach. That it's mamash the shechina. That's why if something falls from the decorations, you're not allowed to pick it up. Even on Chol HaMoed, it's still muksa. Because it's enraptured, it's surrounded, and it's drenched with the kedusha of the shechina that's on the schach. And the sukkah indeed is Yud Kei Vav Kei with Adna. And that is the Shem of the shechina. And that's what we are basking in, the glory and the luster of the entire Yom Tov, sitting there with that coming in. And that's the reason that some Hasidim do not sleep in the sukkah. Now in Shulchan Aruch it says you're supposed to sleep in the sukkah. That you're supposed to be Teishu Kein Taduru, that just like it says you're supposed to live in the sukkah, part of living is sleeping. And you're supposed to sleep there. But there were many Hasidim who felt that when you sleep, a person is not a tzaddik gomer, and he can have a very bad dream that could be tumah, could be disgusting. And with the Shekhinah there, to have such a dream, it's like a slap in the face to the, and they do not sleep in the sukkah. But that is their opinion. The Shulchan Aruch clearly says you should sleep in the sukkah. But for those who their Rebbeim had Ruach HaKodesh and were Kodesh Kadoshim and said not to sleep, they had good reasons. So whatever group you fall into, you could keep with a clear conscience whether you do sleep or don't sleep in the actual sukkah. But it gives us the ability, while we are in the sukkah, to be enraptured, uplifted, imbued, imparted totally with the Kedusha of the Shekhinah, which is above us. Now, the Sukkos has in the middle Simchas Bais HaShoeva, which was that on Sukkos, when they brought the korbanos, they had wine, like always, that they poured on the Mizbeach, but they also poured water. And when they poured that water, it was a Simchas Yom Tiv like no other. The Gemara says, Misha lo ra Simchas Bais HaShoeva, someone who in his lifetime didn't see a real Simchas Bais HaShoeva, lo ra Simcha miyamav. He never experienced the simcha of what simcha is. Now, Mefarshim are very curious because so they poured the water. What was so special? I mean, they poured the water. I mean, there were tremendous things that they did. It doesn't say that Misha lo ra Panei Kohen Gadol. They didn't see the face of the Kohen Gadol when he came out. We say Mari Kohen. He looked like this, he looked like that, shining above and beyond the whole world. The Kohen Gadol, in his experience, doesn't say such, but by Simchas Bais HaShoeva it does say. So they're curious, what is this? So they poured water. So many Mefarshim, the Medrash says, you don't need Mefarshim, the Medrash itself, excuse me, says that when the world was created, the whole world was water. But as the Pasuk says to us, that Hashem separated the water. He put half of it up in the heaven, and the other half are our lakes, are our rivers, are our seas, are our oceans, are our lakes. He left it down here. So the Medrash says that the water down here was very upset. You put us down here in this world, and you took the other half of our water is in heaven and enjoying the Shekhinah, and why are we down here and why are we any less? So they answered, Shamayim answered the water, that you are going to have Simchas Bais HaShoeva in the Beis HaMikdash and in the Mishkan. So the waters answered and said, that's a tremendous simcha, but it's only once a year. So Shamayim said to the waters, yeah, but you have in the water salt. And that salt, al kol karboncha takriv melach, that every korban requires using salt, and it's going to come from your water. So they were happy. Okay, the korbanos are every day, not once a year. But the Meforshim on the Medrash ask, why was the water happy? They had to wait 2,500 years. That means from creation till the actual Mishkan stood was 2,500 years later. So they had to wait to be able to see this bracha come to, fruition. And they answer and they say that the water truly evaluated and cherished doing a mitzvah. And they said, oh yeah, okay, we're going to have to wait 2,500 years till we become useful. But we're going to become useful and part of every single korban that goes on that mizbeach is going to require salt. So we see demonstrated the value of a mitzvah. In other words, if we were told, listen, you won the lottery, but you're going to have to wait 200 years. So they'll say, oh, in other words, I won't have anything from it. It'll be my great-great-great-grandchildren. It's going to be watered down, the enthusiasm for that simcha. But here it says that the water was thrilled because they realized the value of what they were getting when that Mishkan came up. They were part and parcel of every korban to go on that mizbeach. And it was worth the wait. And that should conjure up our enthusiasm, our love, our place that we have in our hearts for anticipating a mitzvah and doing a mitzvah, not becoming used to it that on the 30th day of putting on tefillin, all right, I'm making the bracha, it's a mitzvah, it's a schos, but big deal. Not to ever fall into that posture of being so watered down in our enthusiasm. If I have the koyach, I be'ezus Hashem will next week say a shir for the last days, adding on to the Simchas Torah, the Shmini Atzeres, and the Hoshana Rabbah, and Parshas Braces. If I don't have the koyach, you'll forgive me, and the next year would be for Parshas Noach. But I'm going to try to muster the strength and do it. And meantime, each and every one of you should dive into the sea and the realm of simcha that we are clothed and encompassed within the once a year. We don't say in Shemona Esrei by Pesach or Shavuos Zaman Simchosenu, it's Yom Tiv, and you're supposed to be besimcha. You have a chiyuv to drink a revius of wine every day of Pesach. I'm not talking about the 4 kosos at night. I'm talking about by the Suda, the next day, or in the afternoon, to drink a revius because it's simcha, ve'ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin. So what's so special about the simcha of Sukkos? But having written 3 times in the Torah, Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem shivas yomim, v'samachta b'chagecha v'hoyisa ach sameach, that it's the core, it is the essence etched into time of simcha that flows out to Pesach and to Shavuos. It's not as strong as Sukkos. And that's why it doesn't say Zman Simchosenu, even though you're supposed to have Simcha and Yom Tov. But the essence of Simcha, it comes from Sukkos. Avail yourselves, uplift yourselves, soar heavenward in that realm. A good kvittel, a good gebencht lebedik yor, and simchas hachayim should flow forward into the essence of your thinking and every fiber of your being. A good Yom Tiv and a good gebencht yor.